Hi everyone, Tagui, hello. I'm Dr. Jordan Loewen-Colón. I'm a Taino scholar and professor of ethics and AI policy at Smith School of Business. And my background is in culture, philosophy, and ethics.
Hi everyone, my name is Isaac De Souza. I'm from York University, go Lions. For the past 5 years, I've served as AI and emerging technology risk officer at BMO, helping set policy and operationalize our risk program for AI. So everything from third party to internally developed and everything else that goes with it. I used to joke for a long time that if you said AI at BMO 3 times, I would show up and say no. I've currently moved to a slightly different role within the organization, so now I'm actually on the implementation side, helping lead some of the use cases that we have, and try to really marry the governance that's required to deploy this safely, as well as innovate at the same time. So I've now experienced both sides of the table, one setting the requirements, and then also being the person that has to meet them. So I'm very excited to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation, and hope I can contribute too.
Perfect, great, thank you. And certainly I think there's been a bit of a theme throughout the entire conference over the past 2 days about the importance of governance and ethical considerations and stuff. So let's start at the top, and I'm going to, basically I'm going to ask a question, and then each panelist is going to have an opportunity to answer that if they want, and I've got lots and lots of questions. So let's start off with, how can leaders effectively balance innovation with ethical responsibility in a data-driven organization? Like, sure. Ready? Yeah.
I'll take it because we build so many AI products, so many things are happening in our company, and there is a mad rush to develop all this and use all the tools. So the innovation, the speed at which innovation is happening, like things how it was previous year and things it's this year, everything is changing at a rapid pace. How do we balance the governance and ethical aspects when we are building these products are very important to us. Luckily, our organizations, before it went to all the teams and asked us to build, there were processes in place. And I think the processes keep in check on and keep an oversight on what we are doing. And when we are building the products, we also know that there is somebody else outside the team who's keeping an eye on how things are going. So, and it's not, I think the idea is to keep it, or not make it very heavy. And if the process becomes too heavy, then innovation kind of gets slowed down, right? So I think we have a right balance of process, oversights, regulations that we need to follow, along with adopting these innovations.
I think if I might add something to that as well too, is that I think one of the challenges we face with data ethics is trying to determine what the data will be used for, what is the value that it's generating. One of the important things is that we know what we're using, that the people that are using it, whose data we're using are aware of it, and it's clear what the potential benefit is. So I think what we've seen is that we have a lot of data, and people want to innovate and use it, et cetera, but I think the balancing act is to make sure that that is also not at the cost of do whatever you like with it and see what comes up, but that we treat it more in the way that we've seen in other industries, particularly places like medicine, where they're testing out new vaccines or processes, et cetera, where there is a clear trade here that yes, we are going to use your data, this is the potential benefit, and it's done a priori, not after the fact. And I think governance ties quite a bit into that as well too, so I just want to build on that.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, I want to add just one more thing. So one of the things I tell my students is actually to treat ethics as innovation. And so if companies, if corporations can recognize this unprecedented time, if you approach the ethical conversation as an opportunity, like this itself, we have an opportunity to show what it is that we care about, how it is that we're building it into our products, then that kind of grounded in ethics approach, I think itself can be innovative.
Cool.
You guys are good. The only thing that I would tell you, in my experiences with the organizations that I've done work with or worked for, the only way that I've seen them do it right is by having leaders that foster a culture that supports innovation or failing. You need to have a culture that whatever it is that you're trying to do, that whatever guardrails corporate puts on ethics or whatever it is that you're doing, you got to have that culture that the innovation can fail and that ethic doesn't stand in some other boardroom, but is actually in the POC, in the proof of concept.
Good stuff, thank you. Now, one of the interesting things is whenever you're dealing with private sector and government and all that kind of stuff, especially around ethics and governance, governments are kind of hesitant, right, to come up with laws and policies and stuff. And we're seeing that all around the world. There's different policies for different provinces, different states, all that kind of stuff. So how can we as sort of private sector organizations, or how can we adopt a risk mitigation policy, like a top-down AI governance, when it's not getting pushed by the government? How can we as companies start building like a bottom-up type approach to that, or letting the companies and industries self-regulate? And how can we develop a better path forward in this area?
Maybe I'll start this one this time, because those were some of the challenges that we faced initially as to how do we set up our risk framework for this, how do we pick our policies. If you think back to about 2020, there was no NIST AI standard. OECD was a loosely put together concept. There was no legislation anywhere, right? UI ACTA was just an idea. But I think one of the things that we were able to do well was to try to be understanding enough of what we were trying to do that we could get the principles right, and try to figure out who were the trusted players that you could potentially lean on or look for on guidance. So I think in that sense, for example, if you're looking to start, I think you're right, if you go provincial or federal, there might not be that much available guidance. But I think at the highest level, places like OECD have a fairly good approach to it in terms of how to set it up. But that the onus is still on you to take that and make it your own. So I think that's the bottom-up approach, that here are some great principles, but you will need to do this yourself, see how it works for you and adapt it. But what you'll see in the end is that when those regulations come through eventually, they will be aligned to that, so you'll be somewhat prepared. So it's good to be proactive in this space because things are changing so quickly.
To build off that, I think one of the big concerns of today is values erosion, that everyone's kind of like this race to the bottom, like how can we get the most competitive edge, and so everyone's sacrificing left and right. But I think if companies saw this as an opportunity, right, because there's no top-down regulation, every company now has an opportunity to actually be a leader and set the terms of what future regulation might look like, set the terms of what doing ethical AI and responsible corporate power could look like. That's incredibly powerful. And so, yeah, I think more companies, if they saw themselves as potential leaders in that area, we wouldn't have to wait for governments to do things.
Yeah, I think the foundational aspects of like the societal impact that has the customer trust, that's very important to all the organizations. So before anything is done, there has to be like AI ethics office or processes, trust office within the companies to make sure that there is oversight on what's getting built. And unless, like, in our organization, all those processes were in place. Again, there's always a risk where somebody is building those models in their own BAUs with less oversight. But all in all, I think those foundational aspects cannot be missed. With the bottom-up approach, like there can be industry-specific approaches. With the top-down, we might have a more consistent regulation, right? So I think eventually it has to be a mix of top-down and bottom-up.
Good answers again. I mean, I look at this as a collaboration type answer, and I strongly believe that between governments and large multinationals that there needs to be some type of collaborative approach, and someone will win this arms race one day. It's scary who will. Done effectively and done right, I agree with all of you. I think it's got to be done bottom up. That's very hard, and it's a lot of work, and you're in the trenches. But long-term, most rewarding. The top-down approach can definitely get you going. I find definitely not sustainable. Definitely not sustainable long-term if your practices have any type of biases or wrongdoing in them.
Okay, thanks. Audience participation moment. How many people work for companies with an AI ethics office?
Not very many.
Okay, not so many. There was maybe 3 people put their hands up there. So here, I'm going to twist it around just a little bit and say, should companies be held legally responsible for biased algorithms, or unintended consequences in data use?
Holy jeez. This is a pass or call a friend?
Yeah.
I'd like to go first. And I don't know if
Please,
this answer-
Do it.
go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm going to say, the moral side of Achille, who's a father of three, yes, I think they should be held accountable. Absolutely. I think that just like financial statements and their stewardships and those processes, I think that some type of standardization needs to be applied. Everyone in this room can argue with me differently, and that's okay. I say that because of where I'm standing from. Now, if I'm a shareholder that's just in it for the money, again, I would fight this tooth and nail because it really takes a lot of effort to do the right thing. But we all know what the right thing is. We in our guts know. And if we don't know, we kind of look to the person beside us and say, am I right? Am I not on the right path? Versus just turning our heads and letting things go. So it's a short answer, yes. I'll call a friend if you guys challenge me on it that much. But that's my answer.
Akil, can I ask you to expand? So, there's kind of two different AI companies we could be talking about in terms of responsibility. So there's the folks that are creating these foundational models, OpenAI, Anthropic, and then there are companies that you're using those models to build their products on top of. Can you clarify?
Both.
Okay.
Both. And I think it's scary because the companies or the people that have the money, when you follow the money, it's finding ways to hold them accountable in a sustainable manner that they don't hurt humanity.
Yeah.
And I know that's a big answer. It's a short answer, and I know there's a lot that can be argued, but that's my answer. And it won't change.
Maybe I can try to offer maybe a different take on it that aligns with that in principle, right? So here in Canada, we had a legal case where Air Canada was sued. It made a lot of news, right? And so, I think that in itself showed, some wisdom from the judicial system for how they might approach it in terms of what accountability really looks like. Because I think to your point, there is a bit of nuance as to where liability lies. But I think accountability, right, more broadly speaking, the idea being that it doesn't matter if it's AI or if it's not, right? If it was on your website and it was content that was presented, are you not responsible for that content you published? And so I think that there are already, some precedents, I think, here in Canada as to how that might go. I think in Europe they'll do things in a slightly different way in terms of how they're doing their certification and the process, et cetera, so on. But I think accountability is really core to AI. Everyone is accountable, right, for ensuring that the right thing is done. I think to your point, but at the same time, the approach for how we go to it might look a little bit differently. Everyone knows that these models are biased. Everyone knows that these flaws exist, that they're capable of horrible things. So it's already the foundation has been set. So it really is, I think, the next stage, and I think maybe connecting to your last question about the role the government plays. Like, to a certain extent, you want people to self-govern, but imagine if the car companies were coming up with road laws, right? We don't want to have that scenario either as well, too. So I think the marrying of those two for where the accountability lies and where the responsibilities go, I think some of this accountability belongs to the government, certainly. Some of it belongs to the companies and also some to the users themselves, right? So maybe a slightly more complicated answer to that, but to say we should be accountable, but with some nuance to it, yeah.
But I want to share, and I don't want to take up too much time, but there's a large grocery company I used to work for here then. I was part of one of the biggest acquisitions this country's seen. And the grocer owns the largest loyalty program and bought a pharmacy company and owns a bank. Think about how powerful it could be for a bunch of analytical folks that want to come in and provide offers for people that know that, for instance, I have a script because I have diabetes, so I have a certain script. And then you have a certain script, and you have a certain script. And so curtailing my programs like that is an easy fundamental task that the engineers in here and anyone that builds models can definitely do. But from a privacy standpoint, from a government standpoint, we're not allowed to do that. And that's that industry. I'm sure someone can provide it, banking industry, banking experience, and it's like in that instance, I get it. I don't like it. Respecting privacy, but that could have done a lot of good in the marketplace.
I think, just to add on this a little bit. So, I think going forward, what we're going to find, it's going to be a case-by-case basis because this is so new and there's going to all these like off cases we don't know when it's going to be a user issue or not. I think ideally, honestly for me, I would say we would be holding the foundational model companies accountable for producing this stuff because the HMD problem exists, so hallucination, manipulation, and deception. We know that's caked into these models. So any company that's using these models, I think should be held accountable to at least say, what are you doing about HMD? Like what you're using these models, you're creating these products, what is your process in place for if it hallucinations, if it manipulates, if it deceives? And I think if you have that in place, and then you could say like, look, like this is what we're gonna try to do, we recognize we're not gonna cover every possible base, but at least have something in place. I think there's gotta be like a mix, like accidents are going to happen, failures are going to happen, but people should be at least trying and at least transparent about how they're dealing with those issues.
Yeah, I was thinking the same. There's going to be lawsuits. I think that's why the mix of top-down and bottom-down is important. There has to be some regulations on this. I think from the company perspective, how are they going to deal with this? I think that's where they have to be more transparent. There has to be consent procedures. There has to be procedures to opt out of AI if they don't want, right? So I think how they are going to deal with this is going to be important.
Good stuff.
Yep.
I think, like, if let's say I'm talking to my manager and I say something wrong, or I'm building something and I do something wrong, it's easy to like identify and yeah, like the expectation is 100% of the time that I have to be right? Even though there's going to be times unknowingly I'm going to do mistakes. But in AI, let's say it's a customer-facing thing, and you're chatting, it gives you some wrong answer. The person doesn't know, managing the company doesn't know what it has, unless the customer comes and approaches you, right? So when it comes to agentic AI, where it's executing a lot of tasks on behalf and making decisions on the fly, so it's kind of like hard to like know the bias in it. So I would think that's the big difference.
I got to tell you, I think it's because we don't understand it. Yeah. And I'm just being honest. Like, I think there's a lot of professionals out there. There's all these specialists that have just come out of the woodwork. The reality is, this has been around for like 70 years. So there's a small handful, and you know what I mean by a handful, right? Smaller amount of the population kind of understands it better than anyone else. So because we don't understand, it's like this shiny new ball that everyone has a view on and trying to make it work and understand. And every time we settle on something, or we think, you know, we know something else comes out. AI is just doing it at a faster pace, right? I would say years ago for me it was big data, right? Then analytics, right? Now it's AI. It'll be quantum, right? I think the same kind of themes come out of that. But I understand, like I you know, not to plug my book, but I talk about people, process, and technology, and on the people part, you know, we own this, and we kind of control it. It's just, there's so many of us in this world who actually controls and governs it.
And I think maybe I'll add a few points to that, because that's an excellent question, right? And I think there's a couple different dimensions to it. The first one you already basically called out, right? So the person in question is liability. In terms of our legal framework, we're designed to deal with individual mistakes. So that's something that we have something for. But in the case of, let's say, a self-driving Tesla, right, that crashes, who goes to jail? The engineer, the mechanic, et cetera. It's death by 1,000 cuts. So I think inherently there's a change in there too. The other aspect is perception. So for example, when you make a mistake as an LLM, let's say being racially disparaging or making some kind of sexist remark, generally the studies show, or the surveys show, that people are less offended by that from a machine than from a person. And so we seem to be more tolerant of those kind of mistakes within that context as well too. And so I think these kind of like little nuances about how we sort of stack it up make it something that we have to handle differently. And the last one is scale. So to yourself, you can only make so many mistakes. You can make big mistakes, right? But not so many. But these systems might be making these mistakes at scale, right? And with speed. So the potential consequences are also much larger. So it's a very similar problem, right? But it's one of those where like the corners have been cut out And you feel like, oh, maybe why can't I just put in here? Because if you do, you're going to miss stuff. And I think that's some of the challenges that we face, but that's an excellent question.
I want to push back on the question a little bit, because I think the approach actually isn't treating them differently. I think it is actually treating them like humans in some respect. Like if a company is going to hire someone that's like manipulating the data, deceiving the shareholders, all this, like, you want to hold them accountable, right? So that's what these machines are doing. Like that's part of the issue here. So it's like if it turns out companies are bringing these things in knowing that they might be making stuff up, they might be manipulating, deceiving, like there is a certain level of accountability there that matters in the human sense. So it's like I'm fine us like treating them differently, more machine, like once we understand them a little bit more, understand kind of how they're getting these answers. But I think right off the bat, they're acting in kind of very human ways, and so they should be held accountable in those ways as well. HMD. So hallucination, manipulation, and deception. Yeah.
Okay, other question? Again, we have a question.
Oh.
Conflicting things like erosion of values compared to self-regulation, things like governing data or AI. I think just as things that people know are just part of running a business now versus maybe choosing not to do it for whatever reason. I mean, I see a lot of you are from the Smith School of Business. What is being put in education programs for business students to help produce leaders who will end up making the right decisions that will be beneficial to society?
Want me to take that? Yeah. So number one, we have an AI and ethics course in like all of our programs with analytics, AI, fintech, all that kind of stuff. Jordan's the guy who teaches that, and so he definitely has some frameworks that he passes on to the students. Particularly Smith, I don't know about other business schools, but we also have a certificate in social impact, and we have certificates in sustainable finance and things like that as well. So we're definitely not just focused on profit, right? And we want to be thinking about society as a whole. And so we are incorporating that into many of our courses and programs as well. Yeah. This is today. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Hi, Nicole.
Thank you very much for a very insightful talk. Actually, I have a questions regarding ethics in the global and the regional perspective. So then how would you reconcile the global data ethic framework with the local and regional differences when you are trying to build a cross-border AI solution?
I would first maybe ask ChatGPT or my internally built solution. I think that it's in all seriousness, there's a couple of things that you need to be aware of. The first one I mentioned was principles. So in terms of marrying how the different frameworks kind of come together, in principle, that would be the first place to create alignment. I think the execution will always be a place where you'll be challenged, right, in terms of being the due diligence required to say exactly what regulation maps to what control and how you plan to mitigate it. But I think the fact that we are increasingly becoming, more involved in multiple markets and data is becoming more and more global means that we're probably eventually going to go towards a more unified context. Like GDPR set the tone for a lot of the data conversations we've had recently. I feel like the AI Act and these other regulations will kind of keep carrying towards that direction. So you might have different, regulations at a local level, maybe at the country level or state level. But I think more broadly, you'll always have the same principles at the very top. So, maybe talk to Microsoft. They're particularly good at navigating those kinds of jurisdictional issues. Yeah.
I think the foundational aspects are going to be the same. There can't be bias towards certain group here and bias towards the same group somewhere else, right? That fairness has to be there. The bias should not be there. The societal impact also has to be studied, has to be kept in mind. So the foundational aspects, I think, won't change, whether you're doing here or in India.
I got to tell you, if there is a solution or a way of thinking about it in a way that can collaborate the entire world, I think we are, my kids would say a minute out. I think we're a far ways out. I just think it's going to take a bunch of time to figure it out, and we'll make some mistakes along the way, and it's just going to be like a continual evolution. But I'm not so sure it'll all be reconciled. Certain components can be. At that regional level across the world, whether you're doing work in Canada versus Argentina, versus Philadelphia, Philly in the U.S., there's a lot of differences to take into account.
And I think just to add finally, I think one of the beautiful things about AI is its ability to create kind of hyper localized models and products. And so, like, I'm thinking even in the mental health industry, like I consult for a variety of different folks who are trying to create AI mental health apps. It's like everyone wants to make the global one, but look, to be honest, a global mental health app probably isn't going to be that great. That's going to cause a lot of problems. But if you recognize you can be a global company with AI products that are localized for particular cultures, for particular groups, I think that's where we're headed. And so rather than trying to create the one model for all, we're going to see models for their particular cases and contexts.
Perfect. Okay, and that is actually the end of the panel. So thank you very much, panelists, for joining us today, and thanks everybody for coming in, listening in. Perfect.
Thank you very much for this great discussion. We will be moving on to our next panelist, and I'll be moderating this one. So stay tuned while everybody comes in or changes rooms. I'm going to wait a few minutes to settle down, but I'm going to invite our guest speakers here, please. So our panel is going to start at 12. And ask the questions here and then, right? Hello, nice to meet you in person, Amar. Dalia. Oh, I'm good. Nice to meet you. Finally, yes, second time. All right. All right, folks. Thank you so much for everybody here attending this second session, which is a panel. We will still be talking about data governance, one of the biggest topics today. And what we'll be focusing today is about navigating the data governance tightrope, balancing access, security, and compliance. So I'll be your moderator, again, Dalia Shanshal. And let me tell you just a little bit about the scope of what we'll be talking about. We'll be defining and describing. It's a segue of what we just discussed about the roles and responsibilities. But we'll be describing the importance of data governance today. We will highlight too how it evolved and what do we mean by data governance tightrope. So stay tuned with us as we hear from experts in the field, share their insights and expertise around the topic. Let's meet our panelists. I'll start with Nick Theodoro, Director of Data AI, CAE, apologies, CAE.
Thank you, Dalia. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I lead the data in AI and digital product development teams at CAE. For those that may not be familiar of who CAE is, we've been around for over 75 years. We've evolved into a market leader and high-tech organization covering simulation and training for civil aviation defense. We also have an airline operations software business called Flightscape, powered by CAE. We are global, 13,000 employees, over 40 countries, 240 plus training centers. So as you can imagine, in the context of this discussion, highly regulated environment.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nick. Our second panelist, Amar Narain, CIO and SVP of Pizza Pizza.
Hi. Thanks, Dalia. Yes, everyone should know what Pizza Pizza does. We're one of the largest pizzeria in Canada, and if you're not from Western Canada, we also own a second run called Pizza 73. And one of the unique things with us is we manage a turnkey operation where everything we provide to our franchisees. So as an organization, what we do is we manage data from our franchisee to our customers and all the way to the transaction that's happened at the store level. So it's a very, very centralized system.
Thank you, Amar. And I'd like to introduce Muskar Jahan, Director, Data Management and AI at McKeown. I'll leave the floor to you to introduce yourself briefly. Go ahead.
Thanks, Dalia. I'm a director of AI and data management at McKeown. McKeown is it's a healthcare, mostly in a wellness and preventative healthcare space. That's where we are kind of like a global leader. We take a very, very evidence-based approach in our services. We have location across GTA, mostly based in Toronto. As you can assume, like being a healthcare organization, there are like we produce so many data on a daily basis. So for us in McKeown, data is just not a resource. It's more of a responsibility, and we take this responsibility seriously.
All right,
Thanks.
thank you. Thank you so much for the introduction. We're going to start right away with a kickoff question for anyone who would like to answer that. What are the most critical components of a unified framework, and where do most organizations stumble first? So
I can start.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So in terms of where our organizations stumble, I'll get to the framework after. I've been in tech for over 20 years. I've experienced multiple industries, and there's always a big focus on technology, right? Let's choose the technology, let's integrate the technology, implement it. There's a lot of emphasis put around there, a lot of budget and time. When the focus should be on the what's the purpose, right? What's the objective? What's the outcome we're trying to solve? What's the problem we're trying to solve? For which persona? Is it your external customer? Is it your employee? Through the employee experience. And then all of that is fueled by a data strategy. So do we have the data? Can we use the data? So we don't talk too much about that. So we need to work our way backwards. The three components that we have prioritized at CAE is one, the tight alignment with the internal entities that define these enterprise policies. So that's your legal, your compliance, your risk, your privacy, your cybersecurity teams. You need to be aligned with them. And all of us here as domain practitioners need to help them understand what are those risks and how do we mitigate them. Because we can go very far in terms of some of the internal functions panicking on, okay, AI, we don't understand that topic, how are we consuming the data? Two would be embedding a lot of these controls that come from these teams into our workflows, whether that's our platforms like our dev experience platform, our data science workbench, our pipelines. We talk about privacy by design. You want to embed that as much as possible from a data management standpoint. There's also the data lineage, the metadata management, understanding if you have PII in your data estate, where is that? Is that controlled, secure, governed? The third part, and most importantly for me, is that alignment with business and tech and clear accountability on ownership of data assets or AI assets, right? There's a life cycle to these assets, whether you've deployed an MVP, a POC, or you've productized it at scale, that needs to be sustained and maintained. And there's a cost associated to that too. So that quality, the pipelines, et cetera, needs to be taken care of.
And we'll be getting more into that later about whether the technical team is the sole responsible about this, or are there any other stakeholders that need to, that play a role in that. Anybody else would like to answer this question, maybe industry specific?
Sure. To me, it's when I look at unified data governance, just imagine that you're trying to assemble IKEA furniture, right? So in order to do that, first you need their instruction, right? So that's, to us, that's kind of like the policy. And then once you have the instruction, you need the right tools to assemble the furniture. To us, as more of a technology, right? And the third component is you need someone to do that, right? You need someone to read those instructions and physically assemble that furniture, and that's the ownership that he was talking about.
Right.
So, most of the organizations, they trip over when they talk about data governance. I think it's, they treat data governance as a one-time project, right? But unfortunately, it is more of a very, I would say, living and evolving practice. So that's where I think the gap is.
Yeah, and if I could add, one of the biggest part with data governance is having siloed data, right? Everyone has their own, version of that data somewhere else.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day is, how do you know what's the true source of it? Where is it coming from? And it's a common thing with in many industries today. And having that unified data source and managing it and having that single source where all data are coming from is very, very important. There could be argument that, okay, certain areas doesn't have all the access of the data, and how do you manage that? So I think it's a very collaborative effort on how you do it, but at the end of the day, the governance part has to be mitigated in the back end and how things are being done. And auditing is a very, very important part because, like my friend here said, it's an evolving process. It's not a one-time done thing.
Yep. Right, thank you. And I see a lot of points here are going to be discussed also later. But what I want to switch on now, I mean, we've talked about the overall data governance challenges and how to build the framework. Now, data governance has existed. It's not a new concept. It's been there since the 1980s. But with the introduction of AI, what I'd like to ask the panelists is, where does AI governance intersect with traditional data governance? Are there any controls, frameworks, or is it the same or fundamentally different?
I can start on that one.
Thank you.
So at CE, we defined an enterprise policy on the responsible use of AI. Typical organizations. Then you want to operationalize that policy. You're assessing risk, right? So you're assessing, in data governance, you're assessing risks associated to data. In AI governance, you're assessing risk associated to the AI models. But where do these risk assessments start? They start by questions around what data are you using? What's the classification of that data? Is it subject to any regulatory restrictions? Like in our case, we have export control, ITAR, EAR 99, controlled goods, etc. And then what input are you giving the model and what output are you getting? And the output of the model has other considerations, right? So fundamentally, it starts with the data.
Yeah, I think just to kind of add on to what Nick just said, to me, it's more of a traditional governance. It's always there, and that obviously focus more on data. So to me, it's more of a like you want to making sure that the quality of input is there, right? But when you come to AI, now it becomes like you're adding multiple layers on the top. So now you need to ensure that the integrity of output is there. So that's where I think they are kind of like intersect.
But yeah, that's a good point.
And one thing I would add, I'm always adding, again, the unique part, the governance at the end of the day, the fundamental part is always there, whether it's AI or a regular business analytic tool. The difference between an AI part is understanding the training of that model, what output you're getting, like Mishkar just said, and also the biasing, right? What's the ethics behind it? What information are we letting out? Is it too personal information? Is someone else getting information that they shouldn't, because it's not a traditional data model that you're pulling data. Now, you might be having data with multiple data models in the back end that you're correlating data and you're pulling data. So it's a little bit more challenging, but definitely it's a level where you do have to be a lot more careful in how you're governing those data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so risk assessment and making sure the output is not biased while we train the model. Now, moving on to data governance and data governance in AI, and we know now the difference. Nick kind of touched on that at the beginning, and it's aligning with business goals and agile execution. Now, product and engineering teams, they want to get to work. They want to, go hands-on quickly. I don't know if you're a developer here and you want to finish your use case as quickly as possible. But sometimes data governance processes can be seen as a bottleneck or slowing down agile execution of a business or deployment and delivery of a product. Now, the question to the panelists is, how do you ensure governance isn't seen as a bottleneck, especially by product and engineering teams? And can you maybe share a practical way to align governance with changing business priorities in an agile environment, if you have something in mind? But mainly, how do we ensure governance isn't seen as a bottleneck to agility and business production?
I'll go again. This is the flow, so
yes,
I guess we're going to stick to the flow. Okay, in our digital product execution model, we want to have a multidisciplinary team approach, right? So starting with the use cases that have been defined and mapping the data sources, you want to start your governance there and work your way backwards on specific data sources to link to your objectives. Because if you just start, which are other struggles that organizations have tackled in the past, let's put in place data governance teams and let's start trying to govern the entire data estate. But then it's like a never-ending exercise. So taking an incremental and agile approach, embedding subject matter experts such as the data architects, security architects, cyber architects upfront in classifying the data, identifying the controls. Where is that data coming from? Is it mapped to certain data domains? Who governs those data domains? You have certain use cases and you want to build a data product that's secure, compliant, and governed and certified for those use cases, then you're going to start there. And you're going to make sure you have a business owner, a data owner, and a data steward monitoring that data quality index, right? So, and if priorities do change, which they do often, then you'll adapt and you won't be stuck in a situation where you've been doing a lot of process and not demonstrating that value.
All the things that Nick just said, I do not want to repeat. Please practice them. But what I try to kind of look at this in a different angle. It is a perception. The perception is like, this is a bottleneck. In fact, I think we need to change that mindset to kind of convert them into a kind of like, instead of saying data governance, maybe we need to start saying data enabler. Instead of talking about policy, because, as a human being, like when someone is forced to you as a policy, you always first, you always take a kind of like a step back, like, wait a second, are you trying to force something on me, right? So let's change that term from policy to a workflow. So,
Policy to
workflow.
water flow.
Yeah, workflow. So now, if you change, try to change the perception, that might kind of like, trigger differently across the organization. Of course, what else you just said on the top of that.
Yes.
Yeah, in terms of, one of the things with what we do, we look at the value, and I think Nick touched on that as well, so I'm not going to repeat that again, but the value and which areas within the business need certain access to. Because at the end of the day, when you're creating a data platform, whether it's a data lake to work with AI or any type of analytics, it's a very collaborative effort from multiple areas of the business. And who will be using the data and how will they use the data? So that's an important part to first discover and know what you need to do before you get it. From an engineering standpoint, engineer could care less who's accessing the data. They're building a technology platform for the business. And once that platform is done, that's where the governance start putting it in place and who can access what and how you can do the auditing in the back end. So those are some of the areas we are looking at and how we're doing it.
Thank you. Thank you for your contribution.
Sorry, Dalia, if I can add
Yes,
something
yes, please go ahead. 'Cause
Omar. We talk about a lot of, product use cases. And there's an analytics organization which is fairly broad and depending on your enterprise, decentralized teams that leverage data to create reports, right? And we never really question the value of those reports. Operational analytics, descriptive analytics, and all of that is fed by data and multiple data sources. Is it your data lake? Is it an Excel? Is it some database on the side that's left ungoverned? And what decisions are we taking on those reports? I mean, those are also questions that we need to ask our business to ensure that, hey, if you're developing a report, there needs to be a good structure. I think Daniel had it on one of his presentations at the end of the day yesterday on the storytelling around a report. Mm-hmm. So you want to see the link to your OKRs, the performance, the trends, and what actions can you take without anyone telling you the story, but really just by looking at the report, can you derive certain actions?
That's the perfect segue for my next question, actually, because this is the last section, and I'd like to touch about the culture and change management. So to just kind of take a little broader view, and I think it was mentioned in the previous session, we all play a role in data governance. So we often think it only belongs to technology teams, but is that the case? So my question is, are there other teams, stakeholders, players in the organization that are also essential in owning and taking accountability over the data, ensuring access, security, reliability, compliance? Now, I know you've mentioned like some teams like the engineering, they just want to make sure the data's there and then compliance would take it. So there we have two different teams. But are there more than that, other than just the technical teams? And I think also, Nick, you had mentioned this a little bit at the beginning. And my second question, just to wrap it up, is how do you foster trust in data? And again, not just technically, but culturally, especially in large siloed organizations, like Amar had mentioned, the siloed organization. So yeah, we can switch. This
Sure,
side.
I'll go first.
There you go.
Yeah,
Change it up.
I'll give Nick a break.
I'm always in the middle.
Yeah, so from a governance standpoint, I think, yes, IT has a lot to do with it, because at the end of the day, they're managing the data and the technology behind it, but the business has a lot to do with it as well, because I could give someone access to a data, but what if someone from the business downloaded that data and create their own database to create certain to do their own analytics and decide? There's a lot of rogue IT that's happening in an organization, whether we want to accept it or not, that's the fact. So those are things we have to understand what we're doing. And if you're taking customer data, like for Pete's Pizza, we have a lot of customer data. Who is accessing that and what are they doing with it? It's very, very important for us to understand things like that. So, excuse me. So if someone is accessing these data, we also need to know how they're accessing when they're accessing. So that's where the audit trail comes in play and how we do it. So for us, multiple responsibility is very important, and it keeps everyone in check as well at the same time that what's happening within the organization. And most importantly, everyone is aligned on what we're doing as an organization, not just IT is aligned with another department, so it's an organization alignment altogether.
And that kind of goes back to, data silos as well from different siloed organization. Anybody else has any input on this? I'm pretty sure Nick and...
Yeah, I mean, I think we all agree at this point that governance, we have to make that this governance is everybody's business. It's not just any particular department. I think, if I look at things, from a cultural standpoint, what I see, like as an IT or as a kind of like a data leader, we're not doing a great job storytelling to the rest of the business about this governance, because this is a dry topic to begin with, right? So how can we spice this up? How can we tell this story? Because in this room, like we all are somewhat like in alignment that this is important, especially in an AI world. But when we try to kind of like, how good are we to telling this story to the rest of the business, so that the business leaders understand that they have a skin in the game, and they have their input is significantly impact for overall governance. So I think that's where I think we need to, as a leader, need to work better on that as well.
Yeah, I'll kind of expand on what I said earlier about the relationship with your business stakeholders, right? It starts with their business outcomes, their business process. How will you digitize, automate their process? I mean, I heard in the morning how digital teams and IT or tech organizations have a hard time pitching investments for use cases, right? So it's the business that needs to pitch them, because it's the impact and outcome is related to their process. So the process owner is the data owner. That's the shift that we've been making at CE, is getting them to understand that. So yeah, that was an important element.
And the process owner is the product owner of the.
Usually, from a sponsorship standpoint,
yeah.
There's a product management,
yeah.
and from an execution, you have the
end-to-end
product owner
right.
taking care of the implementation of the technology.
Right. Right. Okay. So we have 2 minutes left. We can go with Q&As, or we can go with a lightning round. So I'll see if there are any questions here. If not, we can go with a super quick lightning round, 1 minute, maybe 30 seconds for each. In one sentence, what would you say to a C-level leader who sees data governance as a cost center and not a value driver? And somebody mentioned that in a bit. We're not telling the story right. So
Maybe I can start.
Yes, I think
Finally.
that was you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing is like to me, this is more of a kind of like your insurance policy, right? If you don't have it, right, this policy will kind of make sure that it will protect yourself, your organization, and also your client, and it will help you to kind of scale responsibly. So without governance, I think that's how we need to kind of treat governance. That is, it's like insurance policy. Whether you like it or not, you have to have one.
If you get the minimal data governance right, it'll help accelerate your journey and outcome. And from an if they make a comment on the overhead part, it's not wrong. But when you look at their process and you say, okay, let's break down your process, whether it's the cost of goods sold or SG&A costs, you'll look at the process has a bunch of other overhead, which includes business overhead in that process. It includes licensing, it includes cloud, and it's support, vendor. So you break down the cost of that process, you look at the outcome, there is an optimization. At the end, the result is the governance overhead is minimal.
Yeah. And lastly, I would say is at the end of the day is the data that you have. They said data is king. And for us, we have a lot of data. It's how you use it. The business wants to use it. And with regulation, everything, you do have to follow those. So governance is the utmost important, and business do understand that, especially when it comes to a liability standpoint.
Thank you so much. I really want to thank you so much for all the insights for today. I mean, we've talked about a lot of topic about data governance, the tightrope about data governance, and then how to, merge it with business, agile, productive work, and as well as the importance in culture and change management. So the time is up for us. If there are any questions, please feel free to ask us afterwards. We're going to have a little break afterwards, and we'll be happy to answer. Thank you so much. Thank you. They were like not sure, so I thought I liked the sliding question. I would ask it because it's interesting. Thank you. Well, I mean, they're sharing their expertise. I'm noting, I'm learning too. So everybody is. All right. So it is 12:30. I'm going to ask. Rebecca Burgum, VP of Growth, Kensington Tours, to please stand on stage. She will be presenting to us a case study about transforming data infrastructure for generative AI success. Leave the floor to you.
Awesome. All right. Let me just give it a second. Go. All right, how's everybody doing? I know this is the last presentation before lunch, so I don't know about you. I'm getting a little hangry, but it's only 30 minutes. We'll get through it. So my name is Rebecca Burgum. I am the VP of Growth at a company called Kensington Tours. It's not a brand that's very well known in the Canadian space. We primarily market to Americans, but we sell luxury, high-end, bespoke travel experiences. But I wanted to share with you kind of a problem that I think most of you will be facing in your organizations, and one I've definitely faced at all the organizations I've worked for in the last 20 years or so. And today's really going to be about not necessarily needing more tools and technology. It's actually leveraging what you already have at your organization and actually getting them working together. I don't know how many of you have been in conversations where it's like, we need this tool and we need this, and it's like, we're not even leveraging what we have yet. So the story I have to share with you guys is my real world lessons about how we've changed the mindset from buying more to making what we already have work a lot stronger for us. And it's really, the theme is one ecosystem, various tools, but then tying this back to business outcomes. So if you take a minute to think about your own setup and your own organization, like, do your tools actually work together, or are people still doing things manually? I've worked at all sizes of organizations, small organizations where there's like 50 or less people, mid-size, huge behemoths where there's tens of thousands of people. This problem seems to be persistent, at least in my experience, right? At least to some extent. So, does your marketing team have data in 5 different places that doesn't line up with each other? Are sales still manually inputting every single piece of information on your leads and in your CRM? There's absolutely no automation or tools to support that. Can customer service actually see all the interactions that they've had, that the organization has had with their clients? And do finance teams actually understand and spend time like reconciling the platforms? So while you're managing these systems, and when we're faced with this manual effort and things are disparate and sitting in different places, there are competitors out there that are probably doing this smarter and more quickly than you are. But the solution to this isn't more tools, it's really connecting the ones that you have and connecting them to real problems and KPIs. So let me take you back to my journey. So I stepped into a role where I was responsible both for net new acquisition, but also for upsell and cross-sell of our existing clients in our database. On paper, we had really strong tools, right? We had a CRM, we had marketing automation, we had web analytics, we had a CDP that we were working towards. But in practice, it kind of looked like this, right? Everything was fragmented. We were on multiple platforms. Reporting was reactive a lot of the time. It wasn't real time or even near real time. And the truth is, we need it to work like that, right? How do you get your organization? Because I bet you if you go through your stack, you can probably tick all, if not most of these off. How do you go from this disorganized infrastructure to one that's connected and truly working together before we add more stuff in? So we're not suffering from a lack of technology, we're suffering from a lack of integration. And today, we're drowning in tools. So enterprises use an average of 91 marketing tools in their stack, but we've got only 42% of marketers saying they can effectively use customer data. And you're probably wondering why I'm talking about marketing. We're going to get there in a second. But all of that to say, it's not a technology problem, it's a connection problem. Integration is not about adding more, it's about making what you have truly work together, and how do we shift our focus into that? The next thing, and this is where I feel like a lot of organizations can get it wrong, you've got to start with your stakeholders, not with your stack. And even the presentation that was in here before was saying, hey, we're shifting that mindset to talk to the people that are actually using or benefiting from the tools. So typically, when we're talking about bringing in a new tool into the organization, that conversation's coming through your IT department or your CIO or your CTO teams. And there's usually a lot of excitement about a new shiny tool. And that excitement can be pervasive throughout the organization. But then the adoption doesn't tend to follow. And I think the big problem for that, at least in my experience, is because the adoption follows the people and the leaders actually knowing and validating the importance of that tool, and that needs to go beyond just the IT or your technology teams. So who you engage first when you're talking about technology really matters. It's not always who owns the tools, it's the people who feel that friction and the friction that you're going to solve by doing what we're talking about on the previous slide. So my advice is always to start with a team that has something at stake. Where's the most friction in your organization? Where's the most noise? How can we use what we already have today to go to that person and say, hey, I've got a solution for you, get them bought in, and they're going to be your biggest advocate and supporter to get that done. I think we all know nothing gets done in any organization when you go it alone, so getting that buy-in and that excitement from the get-go is really key. And I think from there, integration becomes an accelerator. This is no longer a side project. You have an equal counterpart to your CTO or your CIO in that organization, just as bought into the need and the direction of where we're going, and they're going to champion that work. That means it's going to continue to get prioritized over other things. If you need incremental investment, it's going to be there. It also means the teams that need to benefit from that are going to adopt it and use it as well. So now on to the marketing part. So your stakeholder may not be who you think. CMOs are now the biggest internal consumers of data. They drive the spend, they drive the strategy, and they will drive the success of your integration. They are the top consumer of internal data. 71% say, from a study from Gartner, that it's their #1 priority going into 2026. Marketing also now drives over 50% of enterprise tech decisions. From CRM to AI enablement, it's your marketing teams that you want to get bought in that's really going to be a benefit for a lot of the tools that we work with every day. Marketing also now drives most of the budget too. So now they're the team that's pushing forward, that's pushing for connected customer views, for data activation, and for real-time intelligence, and they're often the ones to first feel the fragmentation. So, is your organization actually aligned? I think is the key question to ask, right? I've tried to draw a very bad leaky funnel, so bear with me on the graphic, but the point is companies are losing 20 to 30% of their revenue each year due to process inefficiencies. If you think you could even close a couple percentages of that gap, what does that mean for your organization? What does that mean for the revenue you're going to drive in that year? So there's a big opportunity. You don't have to close it all, but it's definitely there. Manual data handling causes 62% of marketers to miss campaign opportunities, right? Data is key. Data is key in all of our businesses, but for marketers especially, they're the ones with very large budgets that are trying to optimize to bring in that new revenue or get existing revenue out of your client set. The more that they're enabled, the better they can spend. So without a framework for these tools, the tools actually become overhead. They're not strategic. You don't have the buy-in. They're kind of, they're being run, and I think you have teams that really focus on them, but not necessarily to drive business outcomes. And then, they can often get forgotten about or not prioritized. So I think an action that you could take if this is a problem that you're facing is really running a connectivity audit. Think about your stack, think about what you have, what are actually talking to each other or connected to each other versus how much is disparate or working or being optimized in isolation. So for me, marketing, integration made our marketing efforts at the last 2 companies I've worked at really more intelligent. We got more sales production out of our teams. Our spend was more efficient. And here's some examples of what happens when it clicks, right? So there we go. Outcomes. So our qualified leads from doing all the things on the left, right? Web to CRM sync, building a scoring model. And this was a very simple scoring model that wasn't integrated. It sat outside of our existing infrastructure because we needed to prove it out. But we connected it into our media buying technologies. Progressive profiling, again, simple. This was not like the Cadillac of profiling, but just starting with something simple, and then also making sure from a lead assignment perspective, we had an algorithm that took all of this information and all of this data and actually decided who should that lead be assigned to, because we knew enough about our sales team to say, Bobby should get this lead because he's really great at that, and Sally should get this one. And the combination of doing this, and this, this wasn't overnight. This did take, we saw progress between 12 and 36 months. But the results at the end of year 3 was a 10% lift in qualified leads, 2 times the channel efficiency. So where we were before got a lot more efficient, both from a cost effectiveness, but also from a team efficiency. We were spending less times on calls, less times in sales conversation because they were better qualified. 40% increase in conversion, in net sales conversion, we saw a 40% uptick. 30% reduction in acquisition costs in the first 6 months, which then went up to 50% reduction in cost of acquisition by month 12. And this was just starting simple. There's still a lot of runway to go to get these things that we've done on the left. There's more to be done, but even just starting with a few core use cases that are friction within your organization can result in significant impact for your bottom line. So what happens when it all works together? Our working growth stack really drives margin, velocity, and scale. Connected customer journeys outperform siloed ones by 3 to 5 times when it comes to increased revenue impact. CRM and scoring and routing, that combination together drove 250% increase in cost efficiency. We went from a cost per lead that was just sub $500 down to a stabilized cost per lead of $125. So quite a significant decrease there. And then the data lake integration, we had a 10 times reduction in cycle lead time, meaning we were getting data faster, data was more accurate, data was more connected across the different touch points in the organization, led to better decision making, which is a key component of the success that we've seen there. So the action here is like start integration with the KPI in mind, right? Think about that friction, think about the problem to solve, and what business metric will the outcomes of this connectivity or this integration actually solve? And that becomes your talk track, right? You repeat that over and over and over again to the people that you were repeating that to, start repeating that on their own, and say that in rooms that you're not in. That's also going to be key. Okay. But again, the tech won't work if the teams don't. It's more the mindset is shifting to the people first than the technology, right? Integration is a team sport. That's not the first time I've heard that said over the last day or so either. So I think, when you hear things echoed by multiple people, there's definitely something there. But we all know sales teams need faster conversion. Legal needs compliance and assurance that what you're doing is on side and isn't putting the business or the consumer at risk. Finance needs to see that ROI, right? They need to understand the investment, not just the financial investment into the tool, but a lot of organizations, when you get teams to work on certain projects, there's a brown dollar or cost to that, right? So what's the ROI, not just on the technology, but on the collective time spent? And how do you make it really easy for finance to understand that impact and also repeat that? And IT needs data integrity. So part of what we did was build data SLAs. So what were the governance tiers? What were the reporting frameworks? What were the SLAs? How did they all work together? We traveled as a group, not necessarily on everything, but like the communication and really tackling the mindset of this cross-functional team to say, we are doing this. Hey, Bob in sales, let me just remind you, this is going to get you more sales for faster conversion. Traveling with the same narrative over the course of these projects, so they don't happen overnight, was really key. Because if you see the stat on the right, only 38% of data projects actually meet the expectations once they're implemented into the org. And a lot of that is due to a lack of cross-functional alignment. So in any organization, if your C-suite isn't aligned, no matter what that C-suite looks like, things are never going to go as far as they can, which is why even though you might have a singular stakeholder that's going to have the most benefit of what you're trying to do here, how can you find the goodness for everybody else that's involved that's going to have to say yes or be bought in along the way? So here's what I learned from going first, because I was a first mover in my organization. We were very much in the mindset, as I mentioned at the top of this presentation, where we had a lot of tools. There was lots of chatter of like, we need new tools. Let's get more tools, like shiny. There's something more exciting, like we need that too. But what I learned from kind of going first was actually being brave enough to have that conversation and have others have that conversation to be like, we actually need to slow down. We don't need to go big. We need to go smart. Let's start by running a pilot. Let's tie it to a real metric. And let's prove it out and prove it out fast. And through that cycle of like, let me take a little bit, and let me take a little bit of money and a little bit of time and a little bit of your teams, and let me prove to you that what I'm saying can be done, proving that out. Then we got into a really healthy, virtuous cycle of proving, like stating and then proving, and then additional investment and additional buy-in, and the traction just became more and more unlocked, and that's where the scale happened. So our first pilot that we did was actually a scoring and a routing pilot, and 3 months later, through being able to tell the connected and ongoing story of that and the outcome and the benefit for the organization, we got approval to scale. So it's really how can you prove out things, take things in bite size, prove it out, get the buy-in, and then use that to ask for more money, more resources, more priority. Okay. So here's the playbook. If you take nothing else from today, I would say take these 3 actions. First, audit your stack. See where things are working in isolation, right? That should be really evident. Second, how do you anchor it to one KPI, right? I think the other thing when we're talking about KPIs, often there can be a lot, right? We can go from having no KPIs to having 20 KPIs, and then there's really no KPIs if we were measuring 20 different things. So just start with one. Choose one. What's the most important one? What's one that you can actually prove? Because that's the other part. Start there and anchor this work back to that one KPI. And then, as I've kind of stated a couple of times, go and build your cross-functional team, right? Figure out who needs to be in the room, who needs to be bought in, who needs to champion us and echo us through the organization. Who's going to be the people that you know are going to say no? Because we all know who those people are in our orgs, right? Like, they come from a place of no, know those people, and figure out what's the right way to get their buy-in and to tell them what's in it for them, whatever that may be. It's really not about boiling the ocean. It's about building this bridge, both from a technology, what's the technology bridges between the different components, but also what's the bridge internally to make sure people are aware and understanding and it's connected. So integration doesn't start in the IT room. It really does start in the boardroom. So with that, I'd say a final thought is like integration is really like the unlock. Your data ecosystem likely doesn't flow without that. You don't need more dashboards. You don't need new tools to unlock untapped growth. I promise you there's an opportunity within your org where you can implement some of what I've talked about today. You need more connection between your tech, your teams, and your outcomes. So ask yourself, where is your system leaking value right now? And what can you do about it today? And then who do you need to bring along for the ride? That is all I had. I can open up the floor. Oh, yeah, thank you. Short but sweet, right? But I am happy to take any questions for the next 7 minutes or so. Yeah. Yeah.
You talked about integration and KPIs that were unlocked.
Yeah.
But that doesn't do anything itself. Like, what actions did the business do that they couldn't do before by having things more streamlined?
Yeah, for sure. So I'd say some of the problems we had, one of the key problems is that we had different versions of the truth from a data perspective. Like there was a lot to kind of reassemble, but I'd say data was probably one of the first things that we started with, where we had, from a marketing perspective, we had data in Adobe, we had data in GA, we had data in a CRM, and all of that was disparate. I think the first thing was recognizing that, hey, when we're looking for this metric, it's calculated 3 totally different ways, saying a complete different thing. I think it was first identifying that, and then having an action plan to be like, do we have a source of truth? Why is there disparity? Aligning on that source, like lining on that source of truth, correcting the metric if we need to, and then almost like removing the other 2 as a source for that. So like that's one example of what we had to do was really like.
I was thinking more along the lines
yeah.
of like, You said the conversion costs went down.
Yeah.
The conversion rates went up.
Yeah.
What did they do differently they couldn't do before as a result of the integration?
Yeah, so I'd say, okay, that's fine. I'd say like not having the right data. So first we were optimizing off of the wrong data. So that's key, right? You're thinking something is successful when in reality it's not successful. We had to fix that. The other thing was that we weren't actually tracking our users. So we obviously know with IP, like with cookies and IP addresses and switching devices, like that's getting more and more challenging to do. We actually started collecting more first-party data, right? And zero-party data wherever we can, but we had a first-party, intentional first-party data strategy to collect that from consumers and use that in our purchase power that we didn't have before. So like that was non-existent. We were just sort of using general targeting through the payment algorithms to do that. That's another example. We had no lead scoring. So I was in an organization where we were generating over 250,000 leads a year, and we were all treating them the same. So there was no way to do that. So we had to actually build a system to differentiate all of them.
So did the lead scoring then allow those leads to be channeled to sales in a more effective way?
So the lead score, so we had two things for that. So the lead scoring helped us better identify where to direct our media dollars. It also helped give them a score before we assigned it to a salesperson. And then in addition to that, we had a lead assignment algorithm that was built with that data as one of the inputs, but really then had two separate data sets. One that was a data set where we collected information on each single member of our sales team that we didn't have before, because the sales team was also treated largely as a homogenous group. And then data that we collected from the consumer, whether it was zero-party, first-party, or third-party, built an algorithm, and then that ultimately determined who did it get assigned to. And then we also started tracking after that. So like why that algorithm continued to be optimized and improved, we actually saw what was the time to connect, what was the value of that sale, and that feedback loop after it got assigned was really critical in terms of like improving that technology and then improving the close rates over time.
Thank you.
No problem.
Thanks. A question regarding piloting.
Yeah.
Often when piloting with other teams, the default is to go quite manual.
Yes.
So no automation, bit of back of the office magic. How do you balance piloting new initiatives with the need to have process efficiency and to show that the value of integrations when you are sometimes making things work behind the scenes manually?
That is such a great question, and I think I'm with you. I think you face that when you're doing a pilot. You're often forced into a space to be manual or more like auto manual than you would on your end state. When I face that I don't think that's a reality that you can necessarily get away from, right? Because the part of the reason you're doing the pilot is because they don't want to commit to like that deep integration. I think the lesson that I learned from doing a couple of those is being really clear about like what is different between the pilot and the integration. And because often you can get yourself into that trap, right? You do it manual or auto manual, like this is fantastic, like we don't need anything more. I think it's making that point and making that really clear from the get-go that this method that we're using to pilot is not sustainable, it is not scalable, there's a cost to that. Making sure you know exactly how you can validate that from a data perspective and not so you don't get into this sea of like opinions, right? But I think declaring that up front. I had a really good example where we did this with a calendar booking tool. So we needed it, like we didn't have one, we did a business case, we understood like the impact that could have on various metrics, but like we didn't want to go deep integration. So we actually got a member, like we did it more auto manual. The pain point for the manual effort was actually on the sales team. And that worked really well for us for actually getting it moved into an automated solution, because the pain wasn't technologies or the pain wasn't marketing. The pain of the pilot was with the end user. So we had a really vocal group that was able to put that additional pressure on to be like, you have to do these, like you have to do the integration in these final components because we're not going to adopt it or use it. So that's probably more of a simpler example because you have a very vocal team usually with a sales group, but like that's how I've tackled it in the past. To who can create the noise to help force it into automation and integration, and then how do you make sure that's really clear from the get-go?
Thank you. That's really helpful to
problem.
not have marketing compensate and do wizardry in the back end.
Right? Just like Excel everything all the time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, awesome. Thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great rest of your day and enjoy lunch.
Thank you so much, Brenda. I may have a question later for you.
Yeah.
But we'll take it outside.
Sounds good.
All right. So track 3 is done for today. I don't know if you're hungry. I know I am. So please head out to lunch and have a great lunch. And then we're going to have a networking session. So from 1 to 2. And then we'll have track 1, track 2 open. So keep track of your schedule and attend whatever session you would like to attend. Thank you so much again for listening and being here today. Thank you.